Cuba continues to deploy medical brigades around the world to support the fight against COVID-19. The American Civil Liberties Union has filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration over the violation of the civil rights of protesters. Burundi's constitutional court has rejected an opposition bid to overturn the results of the May 20th presidential election. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. Cuba continues to deploy medical brigades around the world to support the fight against COVID-19 in the midst of a strong campaign launched by Washington to discredit the island's international cooperation. This Thursday it was announced that 21 Cuban health specialists are travelling to Guinea to join the fight against the coronavirus in this African country, which Cuba supported in 2014 during the Ebola outbreak. The new group will join the 11 Cuban medical professionals already working in the country. Another 298 Cuban health personnel are also set to leave for Kuwait, where 36 Cuban health specialists are working. These two groups bring the total number of medical brigades deployed by Cuba in the context of the coronavirus pandemic to 33 across some 25 countries.
Africa and Cuba are united by the unbreakable ties of a historic friendship, and I am happy to be part of this history and of contributing to strengthen those ties.
We are the Army of White Coats, as our undefeated Commander-in-Chief Fidel Castro called us, and we are today fulfilling one of his missions, internationalism and humanism above all else. The role of women is always fundamental in our country, where we represent 50% of the force in every battle.
And a team of Cuban doctors arrived in Peru this Thursday to support the fight against the COVID-19 virus. The 85 Cuban health professionals of the Henry Reeve International Contingent of Doctors Specialized in Disaster Situations and Epidemics were received by the Ambassador of Cuba to Peru, Sergio Gonzalez, and Peruvian Health Ministry official Rita Zamora. In the coming days, the medical brigade will be divided to cover the most affected regions of the country. To date, Peru has reported almost 179,000 coronavirus cases, placing 9th worldwide, and nearly 5,000 deaths. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro stressed that Venezuela is the only nation that continues to receive migrants returning to the country during the COVID-19 pandemic, in contrast to the neoliberal policies of other countries in the region.
The only country in the world that is still receiving migrants that are returning to their country is the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. It is the only one. Thousands and thousands arrive every day. Fleeing from what? From the coronavirus, the corona hunger, the persecution, the xenophobia, from the contempt in Ecuador, in Peru, in Chile, in Brazil. Fleeing it.
Ecuadorian health authorities have warned that hospitals in the capital, Quito, are running at full capacity amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Health Minister Juan Carlos Ceballos noted that there was a peak in demand for hospital beds in Quito, especially in intensive care units. He stated that bed capacity would be expanded to avoid saturation. Meanwhile, health authorities have declared San Cristobal and Santa Cruz, which make up the Galapagos Islands, COVID-19 free zones. Ecuador has officially reported over 40,000 coronavirus cases and more than 3,400 deaths, but according to local reports, these numbers fall far short of the reality. The political and health crisis continues to intensify in Brazil as far-right President Jair Bolsonaro has vetoed the transfer of $1.5 billion to combat the pandemic, while the education minister has been called to testify over his recent statements. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Ignacio Lemos, has more.
Ministerial Agreement 179 has entered the nation's official registry. The agreement would allow the Ecuadorian armed forces to progressively use lethal force against the people.
Trying to control internal activities when you are not prepared to, it provokes a distortion on the role of the armed forces and violates human rights, mainly to people's lives, and would break restrictions on cruel and degrading treatment.
Part of the agreement indicates that the armed forces may use force to repress gatherings, demonstrations, protests, and situations of internal violence that could result in serious calamities.
It cannot be that when Ecuadorian workers protest, they are repressed. Neoliberalism wants to silence workers, and we already said we won't accept it. This is an evidence of the government's inability to solve economic and sanitary issues the country is facing.
The scale to determine the appropriate use of force is classified in 5 levels, allowing, as a last option, the use of firearms with lethal ammunition to allegedly neutralize violent situations.
If you take a gun and shoot it at a civilian, that's a murder. The progressive use of weapons is for the police, not for those who are trained for war. The police is the one that has the specific crowd control tools like tear gas. In addition, the police also have all the necessary protective equipment.
This ministerial agreement is coming out mere months after the popular uprising of October 2019, considered to be the most important in recent years in Ecuador. It also shows the popular rejection against the last economic measures, as further mobilizations are already being planned.
Brazilian authorities announced a reopening plan for Rio de Janeiro despite the ongoing health emergency in the country. Outdoors activities such as surfing, swimming and water sports will be allowed, together with the opening of churches and furniture stores. Rio de Janeiro's Mayor Marcelo Crivella noted that non-essential activities will resume in 6 stages and municipal parks would restart events. As a precautionary measure, bars, restaurants and other non-essential businesses will remain closed. Health authorities have reported more than 54,000 COVID-19 cases and over 5,400 fatalities in the Brazilian state of Rio de Janeiro. Mexico has reported its highest daily COVID-19 death toll yet, at more than 1,000, but the government has stressed the newly reported fatalities occurred on different dates.
Today you may have noticed that we have a substantial increase in mortality. Yesterday we have more than 10,700 and today we have more than 11,000, and that is why we want you to identify very clearly the dates of occurrence.
The chair of the Caribbean community, Mia Motley, has rejected what she called the European Union's shame list, which was released last month and includes third states that the EU deems to have strategic deficiencies in anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing. Motley was speaking during the first extraordinary meeting of the African, Caribbean and Pacific Group of States via video conference on Wednesday. And the Caribbean community has sent an observer mission to St. Kitts and Nevis to monitor the general elections to be held this Friday. CARICOM said the mission was sent at the invitation of the government of St. Kitts and Nevis. The CARICOM officials are set to meet with the electoral authorities, leaders of political parties and other stakeholders of the country. They will monitor the voting process, including the opening and closing of polls, the casting of ballots, as well as the vote counting process. More stories coming up after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The American Civil Liberties Union has filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration, alleging officials violated the civil rights of protesters who were forcibly removed from a park near the White House on Monday. The NGO highlighted that demonstrators were removed by police using chemical agents before President Donald Trump walked to a nearby church to take a photo. The union stressed that officers conducted a coordinated and unprovoked charge into the crowd of demonstrators. The mobilizations in Washington came after more charges were brought in relation to George Floyd's death. So far, authorities have made more than 10,000 arrests related to the widespread protests across the country. Los Angeles reports more than a quarter of the arrests, followed by New York, Dallas and Philadelphia. US civil rights activist, Baptist minister, talk show host and politician Reverend Al Sharpton expressed his hope that the time had come for change during the eulogy at the memorial service held for George Floyd this Thursday.
But I'm more hopeful today than ever Why? Well, let me go back. Reverend Jackson always taught me, stay on your text. Go back to my text, Ecclesiastes. There is a time and a season. And when I looked this time and saw marches where in some cases young whites outnumbered the blacks marching, I know that it's a different time and a different season. When I looked and saw people in Germany marching for George Floyd, it's a different time and a different season. When they went in front of the Parliament in London, England, and said it's a different time and a different season, I come to tell you, America, this is the time of dealing with accountability in the criminal justice system.
Roughly half an hour before the curfew started in New York City on Wednesday evening, hundreds of people gathered near Queensboro Bridge, where they kneeled in silence for 9 minutes as a tribute to George Floyd.
We have to make a change. When I think of Breonna Taylor, I think of my 3-year-old and my 5-year-old at home right now. Right now. To think that they could be shot just because of their color of their skin. It has to stop. It has to stop.
You want to say it gives you hope, but you want to see change. It has to be something different, because now what we had, once again, we need to see what's going to happen when the marches stop, when the protests stop. Then what happens? Does everybody go back to their separate lives and don't worry until the next incident happens so we can march again?
Tens of thousands of people attended a Black Lives Matter demonstration in Vienna on Thursday, one of a wave of global anti-racism protests sparked by the death of George Floyd. Around 50,000 people attended the protest, according to the Vienna Police Department. The mostly young protesters marched 2 kilometers from the Museum's Quarter to the central Karlsplatz Park, carrying placards with the Black Lives Matter slogan. Demonstrators stressed that racism was just as present in Austria as it is in the United States. Russia urged US authorities on Thursday to respect the right of citizens to peacefully protest amid the wave of anti-racist demonstrations sparked by the police killing of George Floyd.
In their attempt to stop looting and other illegal actions, the authorities should not infringe on the rights of Americans to peaceful protest. We would hope that before demonstrating their zeal to defend the rights of the oppressed and dissenters in other countries, the American authorities will start to unequivocally observe democratic standards and respect the freedoms of citizens in their own country. This is long overdue.
The French government met with trade unions and employers' organisations on Thursday to address the economic recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. French President Emmanuel Macron and French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe called the meeting as part of a series of sessions being held with stakeholders to address the COVID-19 economic crisis. Unions have highlighted several requests, including sanctions against companies that disregard COVID-19 safety regulations and support for those furloughed or left unemployed. Forecasts show a fall of 11% in GDP as a result of COVID-19 restriction measures in France. Governing parties in Germany have agreed on a €130 billion stimulus package to kickstart the economy, which has been severely hit by the coronavirus pandemic.
The size of the package will be €130 billion from the years 2020 and 2021, of which €120 billion will be paid by the federal government. So we have an economic recovery package and a package for the future. And of course, on top of that, we are now concerned about our responsibility for Europe and the international dimension.
North Macedonia has reimposed strict restrictions on movement in its capital and other parts of the country after registering a record number of new coronavirus cases. Authorities informed that 101 new coronavirus infections and 4 deaths were recorded over 24 hours, bringing the total number of confirmed cases to nearly 2,500 and the death toll to 145. Health Minister Venko Filipci said a 4-day curfew will be imposed beginning this Thursday from 9 p.m. until 5 a.m. on Monday. During this time, people will only be allowed to leave their homes to visit hospitals or pharmacies. $8.8 billion were pledged this Thursday during the one-day virtual Global Vaccine Summit hosted by the United Kingdom. The money pledged by dozens of governments, non-profit organisations and foundations will go to Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, to protect 300 million children against infectious diseases like measles and polio, as well as to ensure any future vaccine for the COVID-19 virus will be available to all who need it around the globe. Leaders of Spain, Italy and Germany participated in the summit and called to contribute significant sums towards the Vaccine Alliance. Gavi was founded in the year 2000 with significant support and development from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It also received support from the World Bank, the World Health Organization and UNICEF. And we're taking one last break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back to From the South. Burundi's Constitutional Court has rejected an opposition bid to overturn the results of the May 20th presidential election and proclaimed Evariste Ndayishimiye president-elect. The panel of judges said the appeal submitted by the opposition National Freedom Council failed to provide sufficient evidence and ruled the complaints were null and void, validating Ndayishimiye's victory with 68.7% of the vote. The opposition party, headed by Agathon Rwasa, had alleged the May 20th general election was riddled with fraud and irregularities, including intimidation of voters, ballot stuffing and proxy voting. The ruling National Council for the Defence of Democracy, Forces for the Defence of Democracy, won 86 seats in Parliament, while the Freedom Council secured 32.
The appeal of the Honourable Agathon Rwasa and the confidential note of the irregularities deplored by the CACAB, the court verified the irregularity of the presidential election of May 20, 2020, and that, from this examination, no irregularities of such a nature as to call into question the results of the ballot boxes were found.
Health officials in the Republic of the Congo have expressed appreciation for China's medical support to help the country in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. A team of Chinese medical experts arrived in the capital, Brazzaville, last week. In the coming days, the team will be sharing their experiences in the capital and Pointe-Noire and train personnel, including local government officials and medical workers, in the fight against the virus. The Republic of the Congo has reported over 600 coronavirus cases and 20 COVID-19 fatalities.
We always know that China is a friend we can count on. Today, like all other countries, we are facing the difficulty given the persistence of COVID-19 pandemic. Under such circumstances, the Chinese government still sends support to help us strengthen the capacities of our team to respond to this pandemic.
Senegal's government said on Thursday it would relax an overnight curfew after protests broke out in the capital Dakar against the restrictions imposed almost 3 months ago. Interior Minister Ali Ngouille Ndiaye announced that the curfew would be shortened by 2 hours to 11 p.m. until 5 a.m. and that a ban on interregional travel would be lifted. Wednesday night's unrest followed similar acts in the holy city of Cuba a day earlier, where crowds of people took to the streets to express their opposition to the measures. Ethiopia received over 500,000 masks and other medical supplies as a donation from 5 Chinese companies and the Dongguan municipal government on Tuesday. Local authorities said the donation will play a critical role in helping the city of Addis Ababa overcome the challenges posed by COVID-19.
The support between our two countries is mutual, not one way or one country at the receiving end. We support each other. So from above, we can see that the relationship between China and Ethiopia is really what our two governments called comprehensive, strategic, cooperative partnership. It is strategic as it will make a difference in our development, as its significance goes beyond bilateral. We aim to make our cooperation a model for China-Africa cooperation.
We're very grateful to the Chinese government, people and institutions for your support. We should take the necessary COVID-19 precautions, but if the worst is to come, it is obvious that we need ventilators and ambulances. We hope your support will continue until Ethiopians triumph the fight against COVID-19.
Tunisians were able to return to mosques and cafes on Thursday as the country lifted most lockdown restrictions. Back in March, Tunisia closed its international borders, stopped all movement between towns and cities, shuttered mosques, shops, schools, cafes and restaurants, and imposed a nightly curfew. The North African nation has recorded just over 1,000 cases of the novel coronavirus and 48 deaths. The figures pale in comparison to the nearly 10,000 cases reported in neighbouring Algeria. Given the success in containing the virus, the Tunisian Minister of Major Projects has stated she hopes that foreign tourists will be able to return to the country this summer.
The whole government is in the process of ensuring that, I would say, this mastery, this success in terms of the health situation in Tunisia can be accompanied by a return of the tourism sector, which is an important sector that has been affected in our country, and that there is a return of tourists, and that we can have a good tourist season this summer.
Residents of Tomasina, Madagascar, rallied on Wednesday against lockdown measures in the country. The protests resulted in clashes between demonstrators and security forces. The country has now recorded about 900 cases of COVID-19. The government has started to ease some of the restrictions imposed in other parts of the country. However, Tomasina residents are still under lockdown.
People must respect the measures taken by the state and things will work out. But the police are severe and they scare people. That's why people are extremely angry with them. And that's why the situation in Tamatave is tense.
Protesters gathered near the White House on Wednesday night sang a stirring rendition of Bill Withers' Lean on Me. Led by US singer Kenny Sway, the crowd sang as part of a call for justice in the wake of yet another police killing of an African American. And we finish this news brief with a clip of the song. Remember, you can get all the latest news on our website and social media, and you can check out our YouTube channel. For Teleso English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.